And needless to say, a huge portion of that call was about Namibia and the progress. And, I think a couple of specific highlights from that call. They confirmed the 10 billion barrels of original oil in place equivalent estimate that had come out after the first two exploration wells.
All right, welcome back inside our proactive newsroom. Joining me now is Robert Bose. He is the CEO of Sintana Energy. And Robert, it's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Steve. I'm good. It's always nice to see you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, good to have you back. It's been about a month since we've chatted, so I want to get caught up on a number of things that have been sort of swirling around the company and also with your operations. One of which was a little while ago, Galp put out their numbers, and what was in there was very interesting when you sort of read beyond the main numbers, and I think that's what you want to talk about this morning. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We can certainly start there. So, as you mentioned, we caught up about a month ago. I think earlier in sort of early April, Galp put out their year-end results. It included, for the first time, an estimate of the contingent resources that they had seen with respect to Mopane and the progress. So they had some independent engineering work done, and with respect to the activities that had culminated by November 30th. So that was kind of 2.5 wells. They estimated contingent resource just from those activities on a gross basis of nearly 900 million barrels of recoverable oil equivalent. So that was, a huge outcome. People had been looking for some insights into kind of recoverable volumes, and this was the first time we had heard about it directly from them. As noted, that was the work that was done by an independent engineering firm called DeGolyer MacNaughton. We would expect material growth in that number, Steve. Again, it just reflects operations that had been completed by a November 30th cutoff date. Subsequent to that, there was another well and a half that was drilled into that portion of the complex. So in terms of, the initial bit of direct visibility from reserve engineers about recoverable resources, it was the first glimpse that we had, and it remains, very promising and very exciting, and I think also emblematic of the overall opportunity in Pell 83, given that it's just the start. So that was a great way to kind of start the month of April.
Yeah, and then they ended up actually putting out their quarterly report recently as well, which had a lot of people interested in some of the numbers they were throwing out in that quarterly report as well.
Yeah, so they had their sort of Q1 update. I think it was a couple days ago, or maybe it was on Monday. And needless to say, a huge portion of that call was about Namibia and the progress. And, I think a couple of specific highlights from that call. They confirmed the 10 billion barrels of original oil in place equivalent estimate that had come out after the first two exploration wells. They hadn't really done a lot of kind of follow up and follow through on that number, Steve. So I think people were beginning to wonder whether or not that was a number that was going to change, whether or not any of the subsequent results were going to, diminish or grow that number. And, they confirmed that they are holding true to that number. They believe it is still very consistent with the overall complex. There's maybe even a little upside there. So that was fantastic to hear from them. There was, I think, a note of sort of real kind of confidence and comfort in proceeding around that. So that was great. They additionally commented on a farm out process, which is going on with respect to Pell 83, and that they've had very vibrant interest, which we knew about, and they are expecting to be able to wrap up a farm out process by the end of the year. And so again, a real sort of cautious, conservative, constructive, and confident note overall on the progress in Namibia, which is fantastic. The narrative in Namibia has been a little challenging over the last few quarters. Shell wrote down some of its assets. Chevron had a non-commercial well. Total has had a couple non-commercial wells. Woodside didn't exercise an option. So I think there's been a lot of weight on the narrative, and having Galp come out and provide specific, direct, sort of cautious but confident insights into the progress in the asset is a huge positive. So it's been some very good disclosure from them over the past quarter and change in terms of Mopane and the progress.
Yeah, I guess when you're on the outside looking in, you look at what you just talked about and some of the things that are going on in Namibia. But when you're there, you get sort of a real sense of what's going on. And I know you were recently at a conference in Namibia. So maybe from someone who was sort of on the ground in Namibia, what are you hearing there?
Yes, even, as we're talking about here, like from an external perspective, just with respect to capital markets, I think, the narrative has been quite challenging. People have been concerned. And, this is the fourth time I've been to that conference. And, not that I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't, until you get there, you don't know what the tone is, as you're alluding
Yeah.
to. And it was fantastic. I mean, to be honest with you, the level of attendance, the participation, the overall interest, the conference continues to grow. There were very significant contingents from operators and participants that had not been there before. So a growing and continuing very strong level of interest. So that was great. All of the super majors were there. We met with all of their relevant teams. They continue to look at their existing assets and their progress and looking at new opportunities. So the tone was very good. I think a couple of specific things of note. A private company called Rhino Resources announced the results of a drilling campaign they had on a block, which directly offsets two of ours. They announced that they had a very significant light oil discovery. They did a flow test on that well. It flowed at 11,000 barrels a day. So that was just absolutely fantastic for a couple of reasons for us. Your viewers may recall Gallup announced the results of a drill stem test last year at 14,000 barrels a day, which was great. But again, just given the kind of choppiness of the communications over the last while and emerging concerns about the narrative, to have another company come out and in the same basin in an offsetting block announce a very similar result just adds, I think, actual empirical horsepower to a view that, there really is something very interesting here and it's real. And I think secondarily, that location, similar to the most recent location that we drilled on Mopane, is further to the east. It's closer to shore, and both of those locations were actually oilier than expected. And so that's really exciting. The extent to which the shallow waters actually provide a leg of oil prospectivity is kind of new and exciting. And as your viewers may recall, we have another shallow water block that is directly offsetting this. So some great announcements, great participation, everybody very enthusiastic about what's going on, and continuing to put money and people to
Yeah.
work to try and do more. So no, it was great. It was great. And again, to your point, it's hard to appreciate that when you're just reading headlines in the newspaper and watching the stock market collapse. So it was very heartening.
Absolutely. It's good to have a sort of that insight from inside, so to speak. Robert, thanks so much. Good update today. I really appreciate your time. We'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds good, Steve. Take care.
All right, Robert Bose, the CEO of Sintana Energy.